Well, hey, everybody. This wasn't in anybody's plan, but looks like I have to do it this way for today. So on Wednesday, we'll talk about even later Buddhists, the Zen Buddhists, the Pure Land Buddhists, and the socially engaged Buddhists who are trying to do basically to alleviate suffering in the world, whether it be environmental suffering or war or domestic violence. They do a variety of things. Anxiety, that's another type of suffering, of course, too. On Friday, we'll watch a documentary set in China called To the Land of Bliss, which looks at the death of a senior Pure Land monk and his hopes for rebirth in the Pure Land and how they talk about it. And on Monday, we'll have reflection and review, and part of that will involve doing the course evaluation, which, as I've said, I think is very important. I'm sorry I can't call for announcements. We'll just go on from there. Come on. There we go. Okay. So, your deadlines. Please be mindful of these. To turn in your religion in the newspaper for full credit, it's Monday, December 9th at 6 p.m. That's the last day of classes. And the second exam, in which you talk about the Jews, the Muslims, the Hindus, and the Buddhists as religious communities, you need to send to me by Thursday at 8 a.m. That's the time that our scheduled final begins. And both of these, please don't fool around with Schoology. Please send me as an attachment to a Google email. That will be better. In terms of the final, I talked about this last Wednesday, or a week ago Wednesday. Some people were not there, and so I'd rather do this again, just so that everyone is on the same page. There are two parts. There's a part which is the voices of the people in these religious communities, and the second part is telling me what you think of these things. So the biggest part, you imagine people from these four communities getting together and talking about what's most important in their religious community. That's sort of the most important part. How would they describe their fundamental values? And the second part, which you cannot forget, is what are the differences of opinion within each communities? How do Jews disagree with one another about what it is to be a Jew? And so on and so forth with all the others. There are good examples of all of these. Do not forget this last part. It will bring your grade down. It'll bring you down a full letter grade if you don't put this in. So don't do that. The second part, which is 30 points, 3 questions, you can just sort of tell me in a paragraph for each one. Where do they share common values? Where are they different? You might talk about things like a personal versus an impersonal being. Those are real differences. Ideas toward ethics, those sorts of things. How can each one of these, if you took it seriously, change you, make you a different person, a better person? And then the last one I just said, what do you think? You can think anything you want. I'm just looking for you to tell me something here, something interesting, hopefully. And then 10 points from your mechanics, grammar and spell checking and readability and such and things like that. So that's due on the Thursday of finals week, 8 in the morning. You can go all night if you want. I don't recommend it, but it'll be better if you think about what you want to write beforehand and write some notes down and then sort of let these ideas sort of, bubble around for a little while rather than just trying to start and spin it out from start to finish. That's almost never as good. And here's the template that I'm going to use to grade your final with all of these things. And I'll pop this PowerPoint up on the web afterwards so that you can see this if you want, download it. But today, I want to talk about the Mahayana. Maha means great, yana means vehicle. So this literally means the great vehicle, like a not great in the sense of very good, but sense in very large. And it has to be a very large vehicle because their primary goal is to bring all sentient beings to nirvana. A worm is a sentient being. A centipede is a sentient being. These are all, of course, in the Buddhist cosmology seen as being, embodied souls living out their karma, and to vow to bring them to nirvana is a huge vow. It's going to take a lot of work, and the key person in this, the key figure in this, is the figure of the Bodhisattva. And a Bodhisattva is somebody who is sort of teetering at the edge of enlightenment, personal enlightenment, and then voluntarily takes a vow to stay behind in this world of birth and death until all other beings have been enlightened before him or her, because bodhisattvas can be women too. And so this bodhisattva, this vow creates a huge amount of religious merit because there's a huge amount of self-sacrifice connected with it. You're basically dedicating yourself to the welfare of other beings for eternity, because of course living beings are endless in number and worlds are endless in number. And so this is this amazing act of altruism and compassion and self-sacrifice. And they always describe it as being motivated by compassion. The model for this, when I said text-based, whereas the Theravada started with the teaching of the Buddha, and it grew sort of organically, was transmitted orally for a long time, and then written down. From the beginning, the Mahayana was about texts, and you have different sutras, they're called, different story texts with different philosophical positions that developed over 400 or 500 years. But this central idea in all of them is the notion of the bodhisattva. And the other thing that they say is basically that the world is interconnected. And we'll talk a little bit about that next time when we talk about the Zen Buddhists. But in a sense, because we're all tied together in this sort of web of cause and effect, you may have heard of the notion called the butterfly effect, where a butterfly's wings flapping cause something on the other side of the world. But if you really saw the entire world as connected, then other beings are not separate from you. They are completely connected to you. And there's nothing, you need to act upon that. Just as you would act to save yourself, you need to act to save someone else. So the foundational story describing the actions of the Bodhisattva comes from the Lotus Sutra. You have this, starts by describing this big old house with a lot of flammable material in it. They've got an old man, and the house sets on fire, and you have a bunch of children playing in the house. And the old man thinks, he doesn't think, I need to get out of here and leave them behind. He thinks for a minute, I could carry them out, but that doesn't work because there's only one door. And if you take a kid out on the lawn, it's going to want to come back with the other kids. He tries to warn them, get out, the house is on fire, but they're so heedless. They just don't pay any attention to him. They're just sort of absorbed in their toys. Lots of metaphors here. And so finally, he promises them beautiful things outside. He says, okay, kiddos, I've got some goat carts and some deer carts and some ox carts out on the lawn, and they're all for you. And if you go out on the lawn, you can get them. And the kids run out of the house because they're so happy. And they really, really want to get these great things. And they get out there and they find that there's only ox carts, which they say in the thing is the best of all. But these three different vehicles are also symbolic, of course. Well, the old man, of course, who acts to save others, is the bodhisattva, is a representation of the bodhisattva. He doesn't think of himself. He thinks about how he's going to bring benefit to others. The burning house. This world is described in the text as a burning house, aflame with passion, aflame with desire, aflame with lust, burning with ignorance, these sorts of primary faults that cause all the trouble here. And teachers go around and talk to them, to talk to people and say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." And people go, "Oh, I know, I shouldn't be vaping, and I can kill myself, but I really like doing this." So what they need to do is to find strategies so that people can understand the teaching. So you teach people where they're at. And so these children, they want toys. The man promises them toys. But each of these three vehicles that they talk about, the deer cart stands for the disciples, which is the followers of the Buddha, original teachings. Do these practices get individual nirvana? The goat cart stands for the solitary Buddhas who philosophically themselves work out cause and effect of karma and attain enlightenment, but do not teach. That's important. And the third, the ox cart, which carries all these people, stands for the Mahayana. The Bodhisattvas, basically, their aspiration is to become a teaching Buddha and to do what the Buddha did. This is really different than just simply following the path that the Buddha himself took. And so the explanation of the Mahayana is that the path of the disciples, the Theravadins, and the path of the solitary Buddhas, the Buddhas talked about these things in their scriptures, and so you can't ignore them, but they talk about these as provisional teachings. These were teachings that were meant for people who couldn't understand the full truth. And so he gave them this teaching so that this would sort of do them some good. They would stop doing evil. And then sooner or later, they would be ready for the real truth, which is the Mahayana. In the Lotus Sutra in particular, there is only one real truth, genuine truth. There are lots of provisional truths, though, and skillful teaching basically recognizes where a person is and what kind of teaching they're ready for, and gives them the teaching that will give them benefit. Just as you don't give the same science answer to a first grader or an eighth grader or a 12th grader or a PhD. You give answers that people have the capacity to understand. And so that's what they're doing here. So there we go. Talked about them. The celestial bodhisattvas. So actually, I'm going to stop this now and start another one so I have smaller files to work with.